Coming up on this episode, the second round of the NBA playoffs are about to get underway, but let's jump back into the first round and look at some potential free agency and trade targets for the Warriors from those eliminated teams. Welcome back to the Golden State with Mates podcast. Recording this around a half hour before the second round of the NBA playoffs get underway, but obviously they would have by the time you guys are listening to this. Let's start with free agency and those that are set to hit the market from the teams that were eliminated in the first round. Not too many that I see necessarily as candidate or targets for the Warriors, but there are a couple of big men in particular that I wanted to look at. Starting with the Phoenix Suns, most of their roster is under contract for next season, but Mark Williams is set to become a restricted free agent. We know that his history, particularly from an injury standpoint, having obviously been traded to the Lakers and then had that rescinded going back to last season, then during the offseason being moved to the Phoenix Suns from the Charlotte Hornets. Had a really impressive year, was one of the primary reasons why Phoenix were one of the biggest surprises in the league this season. But then, obviously, the injuries came back to haunt him. We saw him out of that playing game against the Warriors, and then he didn't play at all in that first-round series against the Oklahoma City Thunder as the Suns fell to a pretty comfortable sweep there. Williams is an interesting player because when he's on the court, very impactful, helpful piece for you. I think as a restricted free agent, it's going to be very difficult for a team like the Warriors to get their hands on him. However, given their uncertain nature at the center position, Kristaps Porzingis set to hit unrestricted free agency, Quentin Post hitting restricted free agency himself, Al Horford with the $6 million player option. I think you've got to look at a heap of these center options that might become available. And again, I don't think Mark Williams is necessarily the guy who is going to be out there and available for the Warriors, but it's worth monitoring anyway, just given his injury history and what his market may be. I don't think the Warriors are really going to have access to doing anything more than the non-taxpayer mid-level exception. I'd expect Mark Williams to get more than that. But again, just a guy to monitor. Maybe there's some kind of sign and trade. Again, I don't see how the Warriors necessarily have the salary to be able to do that. But he's a talented young big, right? And the Warriors need at some point to try and solidify their center spot for the future. Obviously, they tried to with James Wiseman nearly 6 years ago, and that's failed. And ever since then, it felt like every center option for the Warriors was kind of a stopgap, even when Kevon Looney was excellent for the Warriors across the 2022-23 playoffs. It was more as if like we know at some point we're going to have to move on from Looney. This is fantastic for the right here, right now, but we know we're going to have to move on from him at some point, and that point obviously came last offseason. Al Horford, obviously a very short-term solution, I think was excellent for the Warriors when he played, particularly after he came back from the sciatic injury on Christmas Day, but again, only played 45 games during the regular season. Kristaps Porzingis, maybe a starting caliber center for you for the next couple of years if the Warriors bring him back, but of course we know the injury concerns that he has. Quentin Post, not really a starting quality center. So we'll wait and see. We saw with Charles Bassey what the impact of a interior big can provide the Warriors. And that's why, again, I'd monitor the Mark Williams situation. But again, very difficult to see how the Warriors could get in on those sweepstakes. And I imagine that whatever offer might come Phoenix's way from a rival team, they will probably match that. I don't see another team necessarily going more than $20 million a year for Mark Williams. But again, I don't think the Warriors could reach anywhere close to that mark. And even at $20 million a year, I'd expect the Suns to match. The other big that I wanted to quickly discuss is Nikola Vucevic, who has been a long-rumored target of the Warriors. Finally got moved on from the Chicago Bulls to the Boston Celtics at the mid-season deadline for Anthony Simons, and then did not play at all in Game 7 against the Philadelphia 76ers. That is incredibly notable. Like, your big mid-season acquisition to not be on the floor at all with the season on the line, with Luka Garza and Neemias Queta in foul trouble, with Jason Tatum, the biggest source of your offense, not playing. You would have thought maybe we could have a guy that, has been a regular 16-10 guy, 17-10 guy over the last few years for the Bulls. Nah, Joe Mazzulla went away from that. I think that says a lot about Nikola Vucevic's playoff viability. However, I think he still has a purpose for a team like the Warriors. If, on a couple of provisos here, if one of Porzingis or Horford leave in free agency themselves, or Horford retires, and secondly, if Vucevic is willing to take the kind of small contract that he might be willing to take to play a considerable role on a veteran team at this point of his career at 35 years old, obviously coming off a $21.5 million salary this season, he's not going to make anywhere near that, particularly after being a DNP in Game 7. But I could see him taking... is he going to take the minimum? No, maybe slightly more than that. It's going to be in a market the Warriors can get to. I think if the Warriors could present a realistic financial offer to Nikola Vucevic, it's just whether it's small enough to make him valuable to you. Because again, you look at it, if I'm the Warriors, I'm looking at him and I'm looking at what happened with the Celtics and saying, well, why do we think that Nikola Vucevic would play for us in a Game 7 in that situation? And perhaps he wouldn't, right? Perhaps he wouldn't. But again, it's not just about the playoffs for the Warriors. I know Golden State are trying to build a championship team, and to build a championship team, you've got to go through 4 rounds of playoffs. Like, I understand that. But if you're the Warriors, you also have to get through the regular season. Guess what? You didn't make the playoffs this season. You finished 10th in the Western Conference. Aging, injury-prone team, you need someone who can eat up minutes in the regular season. And Nikola Vucevic is, yes, old, 35. The mobility isn't great, not great defensively whatsoever. But guess what? The dude can play big minutes. He's been incredibly durable over his career. And I just think amid an uncertain center rotation, if you bring back one of Porzingis or Horford, obviously Horford's not going to play back-to-backs. Porzingis has got huge injury concerns. Right? I think there's a value in a guy like Nikola Vucevic to say, you know what, random Tuesday night game against his former team, the Chicago Bulls, or something like that, random game in Utah. Can Nikola Vucevic play 25 minutes for us? And yes, there's going to be defensive question marks, but guess what? Maybe he has 20 and 10, right? If you can get something like that on a minimum contract or something close to a minimum contract, I think there's still value there, as much as we all look at the DNP in Game 7 and think, geez, do we really want a guy like that? I can understand the pessimistic outlook on Nikola Vucevic. But this is a guy that the Warriors have expressed some interest in the past when he's been making $20 to $21 million, right? So if he's available for a quarter of that, if not more, this offseason, then perhaps the Warriors should go down and inquire about what it would take to get Nikola Vucevic to the Warriors as some kind of backup big who could start for you on some nights and at least play a pretty considerable role during the regular season. Playoffs, different story. But as I said, the Warriors have to get through the regular season first and actually solidify a playoff spot before they can even think about making a deep playoff run. A few other guys here from teams that were eliminated. A lot of these teams have their, are very unlike the Warriors. The Warriors only have 6 contracted players for next season. A lot of these teams have kind of their roster set in stone for next season, at least from a contract standpoint. Obviously, we'll talk about trades and stuff like that in a second. Peyton Watson is a restricted free agent at the Nuggets. Interesting player, but I'm not sure the Warriors are going to be in the running to get... I like the idea of a guy like that. Long, athletic, has shown real improvements offensively this season, but also dealt with injury troubles at the same time. It would feel weird if you just moved on from Jonathan Kuminga and then you signed Peyton Watson. That just wouldn't make any sense whatsoever. So I just don't think the Warriors are going to go down that path. I don't think they'd be able to afford him anyway. Bruce Brown has long been a player that I think would fit reasonably well in Steve Kerr's system, assuming Steve returns, obviously. I just think there's too many of those kind of guys. That's just giving Steve more ability to run like 3 and 4 guard lineups. I just don't think he'd go down that path. Even if Bruce Brown was willing to leave Denver in his minimum contract to sign a minimum at the Warriors, which I don't think he would. I just don't think at this point, maybe a couple of years ago, I would go for Bruce Brown. Now, like GP2, I think has shown like he's just as good as Bruce Brown. So you might as well just bring GP2 back. You might as well like develop a guy like Will Richard. I just don't think there's any need for Bruce Brown. The Rockets, again, most of their roster is under contract. Another big guy that I wanted to mention here, who I think may be better than Vooch and more realistic than Mark Williams is Robert Williams, the third. Portland had a bit of a bounce back. Obviously dealt with huge injury troubles over the past few seasons, basically ever since he was a big part of that Boston team that faced Golden State and lost to the Warriors in the 2022 NBA Finals. Finally got healthier this season and was actually really impressive. And I think if he's available and the Warriors could get him at around $10 to $12 million a year, that's a guy that could be really interesting, particularly depending on the Draymond situation, because I actually do see Robert Williams, if he's healthy, as a starting quality big man in the NBA, so long as you've got the right mix around him. I don't think Draymond at the 4 and Robert Williams at the 5. Defensively, great. Offensively, too many question marks there for that to be truly viable, I think. But he might actually be the best option, particularly if you do, like if you bring at least one of Porzingis or Horford back, you've at least got that stretch big. Maybe you re-sign Post to a very, very small contract. And if you can go in with, let's say, Horford, Williams, and Post, is that a great center rotation? No, but like I don't hate it. And again, look at the impact that Charles Bassey was able to make in the last 5 games of the regular season. Robert Williams III is just a better version of that, essentially, a better version of Charles Bassey, a strong rebounder, good interior finisher. What I like about Robert Williams, he's got a pretty decent passing and playmaking to his game. So we're like, when he's on the roll, he can make reads and stuff like that. Obviously a reasonable shot blocker, one of the better defenders in the league. So Robert Williams III could be had still on a pretty relatively cheap contract compared to his output, based again simply because of the injury concerns. And the Warriors do love a center with injury concerns. So Robert Williams is an interesting one to me. His Portland teammate, Matisse Thybulle, I'm not sure the Warriors can go down this path of a guy who's a sketchy 3-point shooter who teams won't close out to whatsoever. In saying that, again, very injury prone. He's only played 45 games in the last 2 years. However, has shot 43.8%, 39.8% from deep across those past 2 seasons in those 45 games. So that's certainly an improvement from Matisse Thybulle. And we know what he can do defensively. At least with him, you're getting like a 6'6", 6'7", bigger, like longer wing type rather than like a 6'2" to 6'3" guard, right? So Matisse Thybulle defensively can have a lot more impact for you. Again, whether he can fit offensively, I think there's probably too many question marks there. He's coming off a contract where I think it was like 3 years, 33 with Portland. Could he take the minimum? Then if he's taking the minimum, then maybe he's an option at a stretch, but I don't expect the Warriors to go down that path. Toronto, no real players there. Magic, no real players there. Maybe Mo Wagner at a stretch, but I don't expect him to necessarily leave Orlando. His impact hasn't been too much anyway, coming off that torn ACL injury, so I don't expect the Warriors to go down that avenue, even though he's a stretch big to some degree, and the Warriors do like their stretch bigs here over the last 12 to 18 months. Atlanta, CJ McCollum was always a guy to me. It's like, could he be a 6-man moving forward? I think he's priced himself out of the Warriors' range with kind of what he's done for Atlanta over the second half of the season. Buddy Hield, reunion, any chance? Obviously got only a $3 million partially guaranteed deal for next season. The Hawks could either fully guarantee that and trade him. I do not see a world whatsoever where Buddy Hield is making $9 million next season and he's on the Atlanta Hawks. So they're either fully guaranteeing that because they know they've got a trade in place, or they're just taking the $3 million hit and waiving him, I would imagine. If he gets waived, reunion at the minimum with the Warriors, I don't know, maybe for the vibes. But aside from that, not too many players at Atlanta. Gabe Vincent's a free agent, wouldn't have thought so. Jock Landale, wouldn't have thought so. JK, we know has that team option. I'd expect him to probably opt out and maybe sign a longer-term deal with Atlanta. We'll see what happens there. But let me know what you guys think, particularly with Golden State's, uncertain center rotation. Mark Williams, Nikola Vucevic, or Robert Williams III, to any of those 3 guys in particular, and especially Williams. Let me know what you think on him as a potential target for the Warriors this offseason. From stars to intriguing role players, there are some interesting potential trade targets for the Warriors to consider from those teams that were eliminated in the first round of the playoffs. Starting with the Phoenix Suns, not too many guys that I would necessarily consider as targets who are under contract with Phoenix Devin Booker's name has been thrown around a little bit, but I just don't see that as realistic whatsoever. Matt Ishby has already come out following their elimination and basically said he's going to ride and die with Devin Booker. There's no chance they're going to move on from him. So I think we can move on from that conversation altogether. Denver, they're really interesting in where they go here, building around Nikola Jokic. Obviously, an incredibly disappointing, probably the most disappointing team from that first round, losing to a Minnesota Timberwolves team that was incredibly struck by injury with Anthony Edwards, Dante DiVincenzo, Ayo Dosunmu missing the last couple. So just a really horror performance from the Nuggets. It's going to be fascinating to see where they go from here. There's already been some buzz on Aaron Gordon. Aaron Gordon, to me, is one of these guys that the Warriors could potentially consider if they think they're kind of close enough. And what I mean by that is the Golden State think they, like with Steph and with Jimmy coming back mid-season, that they don't need any more star power, that that's enough, right? So long as they get everything else right around them. Or do they think they do need another star here that we're going to mention? Obviously, Giannis has been brought up, Kawhi, LeBron, whoever you want to mention. Do they need like that bona fide big name? Or do they just need to try and get the roster right around Steph and Jimmy? That's, I think, the existential question the Warriors are going to have to ask themselves here over the next few weeks. And Aaron Gordon's a really interesting player because I think he'd be fantastic at the Warriors. I think he'd be an upgrade from Draymond at this point, and that's kind of what a trade may look like. Aaron Gordon's got like 3 years, over $100 million, I think, left on his contract. Would the Warriors go to the Nuggets and say, all right, here's Draymond's expiring and a future first-round pick for Aaron Gordon, and say, you know what, we're going to take the risk of Aaron Gordon and his health and injury concerns. We're going to take the 3 years, over $100 million on his contract. We'll give you Draymond, who still could be helped. I think Draymond next to Jokic, maybe cover some of Jokic's defensive issues. Obviously, Jokic offensively can make up for some of Draymond's deficiencies on that end. I think that actually complement each other reasonably well. This is assuming that Draymond opts into his player option, which I don't think will happen. But if it did, that's an interesting move to me because I think both teams could actually benefit from that, particularly a team like the Nuggets who haven't necessarily had a history of wanting to pay the tax or anything like that. We saw last season they made the Michael Porter Jr. for Cam Johnson move really purely out of financial reasons. Obviously, they were on the back end of that. They were able to get Jonas Valanciunas and Bruce Brown, Tim Hardaway and stuff like that with the kind of extra flexibility. But they have made moves in the past which have been purely for cost-cutting salary reasons. And I think if they see Aaron Gordon and they're worried about his longer-term future and the calf issues and the injuries and stuff like that, would the Warriors go to the Nuggets and propose that kind of trade if Draymond was to opt in? I think the Warriors might want a star player at a higher regard than Aaron Gordon if Draymond opts in and using that contract. But like, you can't, it's very, very difficult to have Steph making 60, Jimmy making 55 million, and then another guy making over 40, 45 million. So if you're looking again in that kind of $25 to $35 million range, Aaron Gordon is an incredibly highly valuable, one of the best role players in the league. He's developed himself into a pretty reliable three-point shooter over the past couple of seasons. And like, let's be honest, Draymond's been fantastic, but Aaron Gordon would be an upgrade on Draymond Green. Like, he would. Draymond may be a slightly better defender, but Aaron Gordon throughout a regular season might be the more consistent defender potentially. Again, particularly when he's healthy and available. Like, offensively, not the playmaker and facilitator Draymond is, but like play finisher, super athletic, bigger than Draymond at 6'8", going to be a far more reliable, effective three-point shooter. We remember that game at the season opener at Chase Center when Aaron Gordon shot like 10 of 11 or 9 of 10 from three-point range and went for 50 in a game. The Warriors came back and won, over time, one of the more memorable games of the season. So Aaron Gordon, to me, interesting player to potentially monitor for the Warriors and potentially target this offseason, especially if Draymond Green was to opt into his $27.6 million player option for next season. Houston, going to be super fascinating to see what they do as well. Kevin Durant's name has already come up as a potential trade. I don't think that's going to happen. Would the Warriors get involved in the KD conversation if he becomes available? obviously rejected a reunion with the franchise dating back to last mid-season deadline, going back to last year. I don't think KD wants to necessarily come to the Warriors because I think that's just going to be an admission that he's got everything wrong from the moment he left the Warriors in 2019. I just don't think he's publicly going to accept that and admit that. As much as he wouldn't, like, he's not saying it, coming back to the Warriors before his career is out, I think would be an admission that of regret, essentially, that he regrets leaving the Warriors in the first place in 2019, and even regretting not reuniting with the franchise at the 2025 mid-season deadline. The other thing from a Golden State aspect is how do you make the salary work with any of these star players? It just makes it looks very difficult to do unless you're including Jimmy Butler. Now, would I consider moving Jimmy Butler for a Giannis? Yeah, probably. Would I consider moving Jimmy Butler and the picks and stuff that would be required to get Kevin Durant? I know the Warriors wanted KD before Jimmy going back to the 2025 midseason deadline, but I just don't think that the Warriors are necessarily... I don't think that's worthwhile. Okay, KD's a better player than Jimmy. KD's healthier than Jimmy right now. I understand that. But you're going to have to give up assets on top of that. And then, like, the cultural stuff, I think is somewhat important here. You have some question marks over KD when with Jimmy, like, you don't have any question marks right now. Like, he's a perfect fit on and off the floor. So I'm just not sure the Warriors would go down that path of moving Jimmy Butler for KD. Tari Eason's name I've seen come up on social media as well. He's set to become a restricted free agent. You'd have to be, I probably should have put this in the free agency section, but it'd have to be a sign and trade, you'd imagine. A 4 with questionable 3-point shooting, like, I just don't think he'd fit with Draymond too much necessarily, and therefore you'd have to move on from Draymond to get Tari Eason. I'm not sure Tari Eason's the kind of dude you want to move Draymond on for. Like, if you're going to move on Draymond, you need a surefire upgrade. I think Aaron Gordon would be that. Obviously, getting another star player would be that. I'm just not sure Tari Eason's that guy. Looking at Portland, Drew Holiday, Dame coming back, Scoot Henderson there. Does Drew Holiday become available this offseason? I'm still just not sure I'm taking on that money whatsoever. He's still got a couple of years left at big dollars. I think he's a guy that would fit the Warriors. I think it's just too much at this point of his career. Shaedon Sharp's a really interesting one to me, a dude that just completely fell out of the mix for Thiago Splitter in the playoffs. Very unusual because he's a very talented player who can put the ball in the bucket. Just doesn't feel to me like a Steve Kerr kind of guy. I could see a team taking him on. He's got the contract extension about to kick in at 4 years, nearly 100, I think. I could see a team taking him on, particularly if it's going to be for a pretty low price, because Portland will surely look at that and say, okay, here's the contract of a guy that we just literally didn't use very much in the playoffs. We can't really ask for like multiple first round picks or anything, right? So he could be had for a fairly cheap price. I just don't see him as a Steve Kerr type of player, and therefore if Steve Kerr's back with the Warriors, I do not see a world in which Shaedon Sharp would be on this team. Then the other guy here, if you look through other teams, Toronto, I just don't think there's a player in Toronto that Golden State would be interested in, but let me know if you have any thoughts there. Another one, Atlanta. I don't think there's any guys there that the Warriors would necessarily be interested in from a trade standpoint. The big one here, Boston, Derek White, already made some murmurs about his future in the wake of their elimination after falling from 3-1 against the 76ers. He's a guy the Warriors had interest in last offseason. NBA insider Jake Fisher reported that the Warriors definitely called for Derek White last offseason. Felt like 12 months ago, or nearly 12 months ago, like Derek White's value was at an all-time high, and that you would have had to have paid real overs to get him out of Boston. Obviously, no one was willing to do so he remained there. Now it feels like his value's dropped a bit, and there might be a situation where the Celtics think to themselves, can we get an upgrade from Derek White in some measure? And therefore, that makes him more movable. Now, I don't think the Warriors would necessarily be able to straight up trade for Derek White using a pick or two. I think it would more likely have to be like a 3-team trade where Boston actually get an upgrade from Derek White, the Warriors get Derek White, and then like picks or whatever go to a third team from the Warriors. He would still be a perfect backcourt teammate for Steph Curry, I think, because of his defensive ability, one of the best perimeter guards in the league. The 3-point shooting has fallen off a cliff this season. He shot under 40% from the floor during the regular season, 32.7% from 3-point range. I think fell even more. I think he was like 32% from the floor, 27% from three in the playoffs. So his value has certainly declined. And I wonder if it's at a price point now that the Warriors would be willing to meet. Because again, even despite a really disappointing playoff series, Derek White, I think, would be a fantastic backcourt fit with Steph Curry and a guy that the Warriors should potentially be monitoring here. The contract isn't great, but like this is what you pay, like him, Aaron Gordon, like this is kind of what you pay for the best role players in the league. Derek White had the opportunity to kind of look like a star this season with Jason Tatum missing the majority. Couldn't really step up into that, and we saw the shooting numbers fall off as a result. I'm more inclined to think like he could still be a very one of the best role players in the league in the right situation. I think the Warriors could still be that. The Orlando Magic, they're the final team here. They've got a bunch of guys that the Warriors could potentially have some interest in. Jalen Suggs is like a Derek White version, I think, just not as good and also injury prone. That contract probably means no, I wouldn't have thought. But again, a guy who does theoretically fit in the Warriors system, I believe. Then you've got the stars, Franz and Paolo. Do the Magic look at separating those two guys? I think the fact Franz got injured kind of gives them an out here. They've moved on from Jamal Mosley. So get a new head coach in there and just try that combination again. I don't expect them to move on from Franz or Paolo this offseason. But if they did, then who knows? Maybe the Warriors would look at one of Franz Wagner, who they should have drafted anyway, probably back at the 2021 draft. Not probably, should have, given how the Kuminga experience played out. And then obviously Paolo has had his real question marks this season, just his impact on winning. Is there like empty calories with him? Is he like a Westbrook type? Obviously not a great shooter and stuff like that. Maybe another team could look at a guy like Paolo Banchero, who can still put up big numbers and is obviously an immense talent. And Wendell Carter's the other one who the Warriors have had a little bit of interest in the past. His contract at $18 to $20 million a year, I'm not sure they'd be necessarily loving that. But a guy that if Kristaps Porzingis was to leave, for example, and the Warriors needed a starting center, maybe Wendell Carter Jr. was an option there. Going to finish up there, guys. Thank you very much for tuning in. Let me know any guys on this trade list that I mentioned: Derek White, Aaron Gordon, KD, Tari Eason, anyone else from the eliminated teams in the first round that you think the Warriors should target from a trade standpoint. If you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel already, that'd be greatly appreciated. You can follow me at POC252. That's POK252 on X/Twitter. Golden State with Mates on Instagram and TikTok as well. And I'll see you on the next episode.